Hello, Tummy and Coos fans. It might help if I unmuted myself. My name is Candace Huber. I am the owner of Tummy and Coos Mid-City Bookshop, and I'm really, really excited coming at you live from the store today to speak with Charles Stross. And I know a lot of you, of course, already know, but he is a full-time science fiction writer, and he lives in Scotland. He has won 3 Hugo Awards for Best Novella, and his work has been translated into over 12 different languages. His novels include the best-selling Merchant Princes series, which is what we're discussing today. He also wrote the Laundry series, which includes Locus Award finalist The Delirium Brief, and several standalones, including Glass House, Accelerando, and Saturn's Children. Like many writers, Stross has had a variety of careers, occupations, and job-shaped catastrophes, from being a pharmacist to being a code monkey on the team of a successful .com startup, to being a technical writer and a prolific journalist covering the IT industry. And along the way, he collected degrees in pharmacy and computer science, which makes him the world's first officially qualified cyberpunk writer. And I'm very excited that he is here today. Hello, Charles. How are you?
Hello, Candace. I'm fine. And just to cue everyone in, it is evening here in Scotland, but I'm still awake and I'm going to be caffeinating regularly through the hour.
Nice. Well, I want to start off with a reading, and Charles's newest book is called Invisible Sun. I have a little thing of the cover here real quick. This is what it looks like. And this is the last book of the Merchant Princess series. So if you haven't read it and you want to just binge through the whole thing, you can do that now. So we'd like to hear a little bit from it.
Okay, as a little bit of an introduction, the Merchant Princess series actually consists of 2 series. There's the original series and there's the Empire Games trilogy, which is set 17 years later. I'm not giving anything away if I say that its working title originally was Merchant Princes of the Next Generation. And this is part of book 3, so I'm going to, this is from the beginning of book 3 rather, Invisible Sun, and will hopefully give you a little bit of orientation around it, but it's going to be confusing. Berlin, timeline 2, August 2020. Elizabeth Hanover scuttled along the grimy sidewalk, shoulders hunched and eyes downcast, running away from the sour fear stink of a rendezvous gone wrong. She was 2 blocks away from the ground floor apartment where the Major lay bleeding and unconscious when a thud reverberated through her ribcage and set her heart pounding. Was that a bomb, she wondered. It sounded like a bomb. She'd heard too many of them for comfort in her short adult life. She increased her pace as distant sirens began to rise and fall. The streetscape of this otherworld Berlin was disorienting and unfamiliar. Her Berlin was the fusty regional capital of the French imperial province of East Prussia. This Berlin was apparently the capital of a union of all the Germanys, in a looking-glass world where France was a republic and the Russias were splintered separate nations. There was no respite in any direction from the reminders of her exile. The people around her went hatless, and it seemed both men and women wore trousers, but that was the least of the strangeness. There are no horses, she realized dizzily. No ever-present road apples, no sweet, sick smell of equine droppings, no boys with brooms waiting to sweep the crossings. Did they eat all the horses? Is there a famine? But there were no obvious signs of starvation around her. Indeed, there were signs of outrageous wealth. Street corner grocery stores with outrageous expanses of plate glass. Some of the pedestrians talked to themselves, muttering or mumbling as if they were mad, while others walked heedlessly, eyes downcast at small glowing tablets like the one she'd taken from Major Hjorth. She'd imagined a future of melted-looking automobiles and streetcars, of flying machines and towers, but the small differences were far more disturbing. An infant pranced by in shoes with soles that flashed blue at every step, hand held by a mother dressed in a hussar's jacket and tight trousers. A brightly lit advertising sign on a passing tram flared an incomprehensible message at her, then dissolved before her eyes into a picture of toothily smiling people. The unfamiliarity everywhere she turned her gaze was exhausting. Liz gripped the torn messenger bag under her arm and moderated her pace to avoid attention. Her heart hammered as a green-striped vehicle roared past, blue beacons flashing from its roofline and sirens wailing like a damned soul. Through its windows, she glimpsed hard-faced men in uniform. It was heading towards the block she'd left behind. Major Huoff's scheme had clearly failed, attracting the worst kind of attention this world had to offer, and now she was stranded without any idea where to turn for help. Her unease veered towards suffocating panic. Major Huoff's plan for Elizabeth's extraction had gone off the rails when he'd been shot by her guards. His body armor hadn't quite stopped the bullet. He'd brought her to his apartment and collapsed. She'd taken the glowing slab of glass he called a phone, but it stopped working for her, demanding she enter some sort of code. Scared, Liz had grabbed the bag with the Major's holdout pistol and bolted through the back door. A minute later, there'd been an explosion, then the gendarmes converged behind her like black uniformed wasps. She came to a platform beside a streetcar stop. It had a rain shelter and some uncomfortable-looking furniture. The cumulative sense of strangeness, relentless and disturbing, threatened to drown her, but she took deep, measured breaths and fought back the urge to panic while she took stock. She remembered the Major's words. "We're safe from Captain Bertrand, but this is not your world. There are other hazards. We'd best get you to a place of safety as fast as possible." Bertrand had been her chief bodyguard, a polite word for jailer. There are other hazards. This was the world the Commonwealth's exiled worldwalkers had angered, the one that had hunted them back to their original timeline and cauterized it with nuclear weapons, if her father's intelligence briefings were to be believed. A peculiar flat chime like a recording of bells announced the arrival of a sleek glass-walled streetcar. Liz watched, face expressionless, as doors rippled open along its length. She saw no sign of a ticket booth or conductor before the doors hissed closed and the machine whined away. It was eerily quiet for a tram. An illuminated sign on the shelter wall flickered, Ostbahnhof, 4 km. Were there 2 main stations in this Berlin? She shook her head, the tight scarf tugging at her hair. The other people she saw wore very different costumes but paid her little attention, as if she was dressed as a servant. Maybe it was her skin color, not just the outfit the Major had provided. She hunched up a little, then forced herself to straighten, angry with herself. Taking stock, she had a nasty-looking pistol she hadn't trained with, a magic mirror that didn't work, and a wallet containing some paper money and plastic wafers the size of playing cards, value unknown. She could get by in German and Russian, as well as being fluent in French and English. But stacked against her were the Major's posited enemies, whoever they were. Whoever Fox had been afraid of, possibly the grim-faced gendarmes in their trucks, and the difficulty of making contact with the Major's backers. An angry hornet buzzed in her bag. Liz squeaked and clamped her elbow tight on it, panicking for a moment. The buzzing stopped. Then moments later it started again. She exhaled, realizing it was a mechanism of some sort. She opened the bag and looked inside. The Major's phone was vibrating, lighting up the interior like a magician's cave, flashing a cryptic message. International call, number withheld. Relief and worry twisted her mind in knots as she fumbled the device out of the bag and held it to her cheek. "Hello, is that Elizabeth?" It was a woman's voice, tinny and tentative. She spoke English with an odd accent. "Who is this?" she asked nervously. "Hello, I can't hear you." Liz turned the device upside down and tried again. "Who is this? Are you Elizabeth? Can you tell me the date you were born?" Tumblers spun in her head as sleepy summer lessons from Dr. Henkel, her father's chief of counterintelligence, slotted into place. "Only if you tell me whose phone this is first," she challenged. "Don't use their name, just identify them." "Why? Oh, this phone belongs to the Major, of course." Elizabeth's shoulders trembled with relief as she recited her birth date. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I work for Control. We direct the Major. I understand something has gone wrong." "Tell me something I don't know," she said crossly. "I'm not with the Major right now. Strangers came. I stepped outside and a minute later there was an explosion." She glanced around, but there was nobody within earshot. "The gendarmes came running. I think it's too dangerous to go back." Control fell silent for a second or two. "You're absolutely right, Elizabeth. You should assume the Major is dead or captured. We'll honor the agreement he made with you if that is agreeable, but it'll take us a few hours, maybe a few days, to get you out of there. Meanwhile, we're going to make alternative arrangements on the fly. First things first, this phone is your lifeline, but it's going to need charging up in a couple of hours, and if its battery goes flat, you won't be able to use it. I can't use it anyway. It doesn't recognize my face and it keeps asking for a password. Not a problem. Can you memorize this number? Control recited a 6-digit code. That will get you in. But you absolutely must obtain a booster battery as fast as possible. Did the Major give you any money? Elizabeth chewed her lip. I took his wallet, she admitted. Excellent. To her embarrassment, Control sounded approving. You think quickly this might just work. Listen, you need to go to one of the S-Bahn or DB main railway stations. Use the Major's transit pass. It's a plastic card labeled BVG. You tap it on the ticket machine as you board a tram or catch the subway. When you get to the station, look for a kiosk. Ask the kiosk owner for a booster battery and get them to show you how to connect it to your phone. Younger ones mostly speak English. Elizabeth interrupted. I can get by in German. How much will this cost? What's the money worth here? It'll be between 5 and 25 euros, probably. How much do you have? Liz ransacked the Major's wallet. It held nearly 400 euros in notes. I found the BVG card. Right. Get to a kiosk, get a phone charger, buy yourself something to eat, and I'll call you back with directions in about an hour for somewhere you can stay the night. Can you do that? Liz looked around uncertainly. Another tram was approaching, its electronic chimes sounding slightly flat. The moving sign on the front of the streetcar agreed with the sign on the shelter. I think so, she said, setting her shoulders. I'll try. Take care then. Control out. The phone went dark as the tram drew up beside her. Liz slid it into her bag and stepped aboard. Moments later, the doors side closed and the tram lurched into motion, bearing her back into the streets of East Berlin. And that's the opening of Invisible Sun, where one of our protagonists, Elizabeth Hanover, the Crown Princess of the British Empire in exile, who is attempting to defect to the North American Commonwealth, has accidentally landed up in the wrong timeline and knows absolutely nothing about what is going on around her.
And it's so interesting. So, like, if you don't want to read the book after hearing that, I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't be here because it's because this whole series is really interesting. So, for folks who may not have read the Merchant Princes series, can you give us a little bit of an introduction as to what the series is about as a whole?
Okay. Basic setup. There are many parallel universes. We open at the very beginning in a book that is currently republished as an omnibus edition called The Bloodline Feud. It first began to come out in 2003, where our protagonist, a freelance journalist called Miriam Beckstein from Boston, gets a locket from her adoptive mother, looks at it, gets a very bad headache, and wakes up in the middle of a forest. So far, so Portal Fantasy. In fact, it was written to start to look like a Portal Fantasy at the outset because, do I go into the business and commercial reasons? Yeah, I do.
Sure.
I had just sold my first 2 science fiction novels to Ace, and the contract I had with Ace, which my agent negotiated, said, we have right of first refusal on your next SF novel. So my agent said to me, well, Charlie, they won't publish this for a couple of years and they won't buy any new books until they've got sales figures for your first 2. So why don't you write me a fantasy series or an alternate history or something I can sell without breaking the contract? This is how the business works at a certain level. But, you know, I don't really like high fantasy. I come from a monarchy and I get very itchy and stabby when expected to relate to royals or nobles. And the result was I decided to write an SF series involving parallel universe travel that could be mistaken for Portal Fantasy for the first couple of 100,000 words, but it gradually veers into essentially interdimensional spy thriller territory as the various existing nations in different timelines become aware of one another's existence. And they are running on very, very different lines with very, very different normative assumptions and philosophies. And there's also an element of macroeconomics involved. Paul Krugman decided he rather liked it because the clan, the extended family of people who can walk between worlds, carrying trade goods on their person, they come not from a sophisticated world, but from one that is in a development trap that is essentially roughly medieval levels of technology across the eastern seaboard of North America. And even though they have access to a world very similar to our own, with all the modern conveniences, and they have become very, very rich in their own world, they're the only people who can get a message from one coast of the United States to the other in a day. They can't seem to bootstrap it to any level of development at home. And Miriam, who's a tech journalist, on the one hand, has absolutely zero desire to conform to the expectations of a medieval aristocracy for one of their long-lost children. And on the other hand, she thinks, well, maybe I can do a bit better. And unfortunately, she's not wrong. I say unfortunately because there's an unfeasibly large number of nuclear explosions in the series as a result of this.
Yes, there are a lot of explosions. And this series, like, you've been working on this series for a really long time. It started in, I think you said 2003, 2004. It's been going, it's been going for a while. So how does it feel to be ending a series after working on it for so long?
I began writing the first book in 2002.
Okay.
This one I began writing in 2013, but various bad things happened, including my editor died, my father died, my mother died, COVID-19 happened. It's been a complete, I'm going to swear, I'm going to say it's been a complete shit show. It's finally done. And I look back and realize, hang on, this took a third of my life, and I'm closer to 60 than to 50 at this point. Do not do this again. The other good thing about it is I'm juggling this series, which is 1,000,000 words in 9 volumes or 6 volumes, depending on the format you read it in, with another series, which had the name The Laundry Files pinned on it by an editor many years ago. And that's of a similar size. It's absolutely gigantic. And middle-aged brain, I can't hold 2 series this size in my head anymore.
That's fair. I don't think I would be able to hold all that in my head either. I'm surprised that you could hold one. But yes, this is a series that's been going on for a long time. And like you said, it starts as a portal fantasy, and then it sort of jumps to alternate universe, techno-thrillers. So was it challenging? You already kind of talked about why that jump happened, but was it challenging for you to write like a different genre in the same universe? And how did readers respond to it when it went from portal fantasy to alternate universe sci-fi?
I think the readers were mostly okay with it because it happened over a period of time. The biggest problem I had was a production decision based on the cost of sewing machine facilities. Back in a second.
Okay.
I just had to shove my office door shut. I originally conceived of it as a series of 4 big fat doorstep type books. And no plan by an author survives contact with the enemy, and by the enemy I mean the world of publishing. It was bought by an editor at Tor at a point where they were undergoing really strong cost pressure from Borders, remember them, and Barnes & Noble, that no book by a non-bestseller could debut with a price of more than $24 on the spine, because for every dollar over that, sales dropped 50%. So to keep costs down, it turns out, I didn't know this at the time, the cost of books back then was determined by the binding, in particular hardcover bindings. Hardcovers were saddle stitched, and if you went over a certain very restrictive page count, I think it was something like 416 pages, they had to use a different bindery with much heavier duty sewing machines, which cost a lot more. So it turns out the cost of sewing machine hardware dictated how many pages I was allowed to put in a book. And my first 600-page book got peremptorily chopped into 2. And then my attempt at a 700-page follow-up got chopped into, well, it ended up running to 4 books.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. That was the worst part of it, in fact, because what came out as book 3, a thin 300-page volume, was actually the first half, as it turned out, of what it should have been. And a few of the readers noticed this and were not happy about the abrupt breaks. I got to reassemble the books into the intended form a few years later for the British publisher, who ran them as omnibuses with new titles, and those are also available from Tor. So if you want to start reading them today, the first series, start with The Bloodline Feud, which is a fat, slightly techno-thrillerish looking book rather than the thin fantasy volumes. Same stuff, it just reads better.
Got it. So yeah, I didn't realize that they were publishing like the bind up, like the big fat volumes now. So
they're doing them only in paperback and ebook because the market realities have changed completely. That $24 price ceiling has broken comprehensively in the past couple of years, and sales are majority ebook, and mass market paperbacks have almost disappeared unless you're a guaranteed bestseller.
Yes, that is true. There aren't as many mass markets as there used to be. Mostly it's trade paperbacks now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty much everything. But in talking about this series that you've been writing now for a really long time, if you were going to start it again now, how would you approach it differently? Like, what did you learn while you were writing this series that has taken a long time?
If I was going to start it again now, I wouldn't. Seriously. Do not set out to write it. Certainly at my current age, I would not set out to write something that would take another 17 years because I'd be around in my 80s by the time I was approaching the end of it. And it's not fair to my readers. I do not want to be another Patrick O'Brien and die 2 books before the end of the series. So try and make sure everything is sufficiently self-contained. You can call it a wrap fairly rapidly if necessary. That's rule number 1. And I am to some extent taking my own advice here because I'm trying to draw the Laundry Files series, which itself was a 9-book series, to a reasonable conclusion while spinning up a new series in the same universe. So there'll be continuity for readers who want to carry on with it, but the existing story arc will have ended. As it is, again, COVID-19 got in the way, but the first book in the new series, Dead Lies Dreaming, came out last year and is branded as Laundry Files book number 10, which unfortunately it isn't. It's New Management book number 1. Laundry Files number 10 hasn't been written yet and will be the last one, and it's still a year or so away.
Got it. That is good to know because they did brand that as Laundry Files book number 10. So,
and they're also branding the next book as Laundry Files number 11, and it's not. It's New Management book number 2. At least the British publishers got the message.
Well, that is good for me to know because now for folks buying it, I can let them know what it is. And that Laundry Files book number 10 isn't here yet, but is coming.
January.
Oh, nice. January. So also with this series, it revolves around bloodlines that can travel, like world travel, and they're often about family relationships too, as well as the espionage and the crime in between timelines and the politics and all of that, but it's a lot about family as well. So how do you go about blending all of that together, the family relationships and the espionage and the timelines and everything?
Chunks of it just sort of accreted. The original setup was that the clan's ability to walk between timelines is a recessive trait. You need 2 carriers or 2 actual worldwalkers to have children to have any hope of having more worldwalkers. So they've developed a fairly elaborate series of cousin marriages with as much inbreeding as they can get away with without having unpleasant and undesirable side effects. And this, in turn, means that although it's a fairly patriarchal, quasi-medieval society they come from, it hands enormous power to the grandmothers, who are carrying out internecine feuds and plotting between the various families as they go. Meanwhile, though, this is actually down to a mechanism that was implanted in their ancestor long ago. This is sort of explained towards the end of Invisible Sun. An intracellular mechanism which is partially damaged and broken. It shouldn't be a recessive trait. It should be a fully expressed hereditable one. Again, members of a clan get horrible migraines if they world walk too often. Somebody with a properly working ability can just jaunt between timelines at will. when the US government begins researching this using extracted brain cells from prisoners, you knew it was going to go somewhere dark. They end up with magic boxes, so to speak. They're not so much magic. They are tissue cultures based on human experimentation. It's all pretty grim. There is, however, a reason for the grimness. If I mention the phrase extra-dimensional narco-terrorists, because the Klan has one commercial edge in the universe of the United States, which is their ability to smuggle high-value commodities from anywhere to anywhere else without any chance of interception. They're the mafia.
Yeah, they are the mafia. Now that you say that is true. And there are a couple of questions. So I want to see. Well, I guess one question so far. They're wondering: is this the last story set in the Merchant Prince's universe, or will you return to it in the future at some point?
Well, when we published The Trade of Queens back in 2009, I said that was definitively the last novel. And, I kind of nuked a large amount of the eastern seaboard of North America to make sure that would stick. It didn't stop me being dragged back to it, kicking and screaming by my editor a few years later. I am, however, somewhat burnt out on it for now, and I'm not going to start a new story arc in this setting anytime soon, meaning next 2 to 4 years minimum. I've actually got 3 or 4 other novels in a pipeline before I could even begin work on another one. Also, if I do go back to this setting, it will be set a long time in the future and with entirely different characters, and it would ideally be a standalone book. So I might do more with it, but it won't be for a while.
Got it. And I'm wondering, who was your favorite character to write? Or if you have a favorite character, or your least favorite, or both.
My favorite was probably Kurt, who is mid-70s, East German exile in the United States. Do I want to spoil the beginnings of Empire Games? I might as well at this point. It's a few years old.
Yes.
The East German Stasi, the secret police, had a foreign intelligence service. And they were generally considered to be something of an elite group compared to the KGB or the GIU, the Soviet spy agencies. They were smaller, but did more with less. And about 10, 15 years ago, I began asking questions. The Stasi Foreign Intelligence Service, they got into the West German government all the way up to the Chancellor's office. What were they doing in the United States or the UK? And people who had looked into the history of the Cold War spy thing got a spooky look in their eyes and said, we don't know. We do know that when the Berlin Wall crumbled in 1989, an awful lot of Stasi files were burnt before they could be taken over. My hypothesis is that they would have had spy rings on American and NATO soil. They would have been long-duration sleeper agents designed to get established there. And the details of these spy rings would be the crown jewels that would have been the very, very first thing they burnt when it looked as if all was lost for the East German government. So Kurt is an East German spy who was injected into the United States in the 1970s, put down roots, and operated as the ringmaster of an organization called the Wolf Orchestra, after Marcus Wolf, the Colonel General in charge of the Stasi's Foreign Intelligence Service in the 1980s. And their objective was not to actually spy on the US government. It was to raise children who would be loyal communists, who would also be genuine native-born Americans with unimpeachable cover stories, and they would be the spies. And 30 years after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of East Germany, Kurt has inadvertently succeeded because his adoptive granddaughter, Rita, has been made a job offer she's not allowed to refuse by the Department of Homeland Security, who in this version of 2020 have the job of securing the United States against threats from all other parallel universes.
I love that. I like Kurt too, because Kurt is, you don't see a lot of I guess older characters like that in sci-fi and fantasy, and so I always like that. I like to see characters
Yeah.
that
Also,
are
his motivation.
Mhm.
I mean, Kurt is essentially a retired spy. He can't go home. There's no home to go back to. He's an illegal, so he's just basically keeping his head down, staying out of trouble, and staying in touch with the others as they age, because they don't want any of their friends to vanish into nursing homes with dementia and start babbling about communist spies, because who knows where that would end up. But he's fond of his family, including his adoptive grandson and granddaughter. And when his granddaughter gets sucked into something that, she's in over her head, he decides to come out of retirement and provide her the backup that she really needs. So she's sort of been sucked into this part of the Department of Homeland Security that's trying to spy on parallel universes. And what they don't realize is the reason she looks so good on paper as an agent is because she was raised to be the perfect East German Stasi spy. And she has the backing of an entire spy ring behind her that they don't know about.
Yeah, and it's all really cool. Like just the story and the world building, which is another thing that I was wondering about your world building process. And you were talking about holding things in your brain earlier, and I'm just wondering what your process for world building is like, and how did you blend this world that's like a bunch of different worlds, really, and it blends like the fantasy and the sci-fi elements into it. Did you have like a world building Bible where you kept track of everything? Was it all in your head? Okay.
I'm a pantser.
Okay.
But chunks of it accumulated over time. I had no idea when I was beginning it that the new British Empire Miriam would find her way to, it was meant to be, I can't believe this isn't steampunk at first. But then I realized that, as William Gibson pointed out, the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. When Miriam finds a way into another version of North America with steam cars and zeppelins, she has no way of knowing that computers, guided missiles, and nuclear weapons are under development in government labs. They're just not visible on the street. Nor does she realize that her idea about bootstrapping a new business, because she's in basically the idea of mercantilism, importing ideas from one timeline into another, is going to destabilize a whole bunch of stuff in the new British Empire, which is actually in a pre-revolutionary condition. And it just basically snowballs. Via a series of serious coincidences, she needs a fence to launder gold that she's using from the semi-medieval world to bankroll herself. And she accidentally makes contact with a quartermaster in the revolutionary underground. And when the empire runs into a complete currency crunch and the only people with any actual solid money are the revolutionaries, that has consequences. And 17 years later, she's in the government.
Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of questions coming in. So the first one is about something that you had mentioned on your blog, actually. So you've made it clear outside of published materials that there's a very huge paratime universe. So where are the paratime traveling, I think it's Opabinia that you have mentioned on the blog in the past?
Yep. This gets back to the Burgess Shale creatures and what was it? Stephen Jay Gould's book, Wonderful Life, the Precambrian explosion about 600 million years ago, when there was a very wide range of different life forms suddenly showed up in the fossil record simultaneously, only a few of which have survived. I believe actually there's been a bit of rethinking since then, and Stephen Jay Gould over-egged the pudding a bit. Some of the more bizarre creatures turned out to have been reconstructed upside down or back to front by mistake. And some of the others are actually sort of represented in today's survivors. But yeah, I don't show quite enough of the full scale of a multiverse to get this across before the end of Invisible Sun, but there is some sort of mention of other groups of organisms out there. And that would be a spoiler for the new book if I went into that too far.
Okay. And this is a very interesting question. I'm curious about this too. Were there any side paths that didn't pan out when you were writing the books?
Plenty, I'd actually say. One of the most annoying things an editor can do to you when you're committed to writing a multi-book series is to get a book frozen and in production when you need to go back and change stuff because you got it wrong when you're writing a sequel. Yeah, that's a hard one to learn your way around, and that actually hit me when I was in book 3, The Clan Corporate, as it was then. There was stuff I wanted to change there to support the next volume, and I didn't get a chance to do that. I'm not sure I'd have written Dick Cheney in as the big baddie explicitly if I'd known how things were going to go later on in that decade. But remember, I began in 2002, before the Iraq invasion.
Right. Yeah, and did you have to, because of things that were happening, I know this is like a different world and alternate universes, but because of things that were happening in the real world, did you end up having to change anything in the books, like from like as it was going along?
I think I did, but at this point I'm having to think back 15 years and memory fades a bit.
I don't remember what happened 5 minutes ago, so it's fine.
Oh, yeah, I do. At one point, I had a poll on my live journal, because live journal was a thing back then. What do I have to do? Which of these options, list of options, is the best way of cluing in my readers that this is not actually the United States of America they know and live in, but a different timeline? And I had a list of options. This was in 2006, 2007. Okay. It turns out that Saddam Hussein did have nerve gas used against US troops in Iraq, so the US Air Force carpet bombs Baghdad. That was one of the options. That wasn't a sufficient clue, even in 2006 or 2007, that this was another timeline. No, the one thing that sealed the deal of you're not in the US anymore was Paris Hilton's celebrity drunk driving car crash funeral.
I love that. It's like, well, we can't do these things that, like, you know, maybe could have happened for real, but Paris Hilton's car crash funeral, that's yeah, they'll know from that. That's amazing. And I'm also wondering, for this series, did you plot the whole thing out from the beginning? Because I know you wrote like a bunch of big books and then they got broken up later. So did you plot the whole series out from the beginning, or did you kind of just do it as you went along?
I had a book proposal for 4 books, big fat books, and actually I think I posted it on my blog in 2011 or thereabouts. I'm going to repost it this week or next week. The first book more or less followed the plot. The second big fat book went off the rails and ran out to 6 thin books in the original version. Empire Games is the 3rd book. The trilogy is the 3rd book. And book 4 is about 2 chapters at the end of Empire Games, because that just didn't materialize at all. And I will say that Empire Games bears no relationship to the pitch in that document, or very little relationship.
Yeah, I always wanted that with series. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, no plan survives contact with you do 10 years of personal development.
That's true. And yeah, so tell us what you're working on now, because I know that you have some books coming out, and you said you're working on a whole bunch of stuff before you can work on anything new. So what can you tell us about?
Okay. To those of you who read the Laundry Files, you might have been somewhat bemused by last year's Dead Lies Dreaming, which has nothing to do with the Laundry whatsoever, except it's set in the same universe where Nyarlathotep, the Black Pharaoh, is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and is instituting the sort of reign of terror you'd expect of an elder god. But at least we have strong, stable and competent government in the UK. So it's kind of utopian. Yeah, there are skulls on spikes everywhere, but, you know, that's what you expect with an elder god as prime minister. And that is actually the first book in a new series. The next novel that coming out in January the 11th next year, is titled Quantum of Nightmares, and it's a sequel to Deadlies Dreaming. Now, Deadlies Dreaming was to some extent a tribute novel to Peter Pan. Not to the horrible Disney cutesified version of Peter Pan, but to the original, very grimdark Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie, which is really a book for parents who want to explain to their 5-year-olds why their brother or sister isn't coming home from the hospital. Quantum of Nightmares it recomplicates plot developments from Deadlies Dreaming, and goes a lot deeper into some of the things that were raised in that one. And it also plays around with a couple of other beloved bits of childhood literature, namely Mary Poppins and Sweeney Todd. And Mary Poppins is much nastier than Sweeney Todd, especially if you've read the original P.L. Travers books. Mary Poppins is a somewhat distant, somewhat psychopathic narcissist who I've often wondered how many guns she keeps in that bag of hers. Anyway, that comes out on January the 11th, and I'm now halfway through writing the third book in the new management series, which may be truncated to a trilogy depending if people like it as such, or if publishers want more. And the third book, Season of Skulls, is my take on Regency romance.
Nice.
Eve, our protagonist from Deadlies Dreaming, who is a totally ruthless take-no-prisoners corporate executive, ends up dumped back into 1816 in a village which doubles as an internment camp for captured French sorcerers after the Napoleonic War, with slogans like "Be seeing you" and "You are number 6. Tell me if you've heard of The Prisoner." And, she is a very, very bad fit for Regency heroines. Let's put it that way.
Well, that sounds amazing.
That one should be out around the end of next year. And finally, I go back to space opera because I have a space opera that was in the works in 2016, 2017, when my father became terminally ill. And I didn't want to go back to it until I'd buried both my parents, and then everything else piled up in front of it. But at some point, maybe around 2023, 2024, hopefully you will finally get to see another space opera from me for the first time in about 12 years.
Well, that would be really cool too. I'm excited about these things. The Regency romance one, it's like I really want to see this from you. So I'm very excited for that.
What if delivering the cut direct involved a dagger to the ribs, basically?
Yes. Yes, I love this so much. So yeah, it's so really exciting. So we have a lot to look forward to from you in the future as well. And I don't see any more questions from the audience, but if y'all have questions, we have another few minutes. You can feel free to submit them there. I do want to pause and tell people that we do have books for sale because we are a bookstore. So I want to make sure to mention that if you would like to buy any of Charles's books, really, you can purchase them from us if you want to at tubbyandcoos.com/special order. Just tell us which one you want. The newest one that we're talking about today is Invisible Sun. And this is the cover of it. And it finishes up the Merchant Princes series. At least for now. There may or may not be more later, but if there is, it won't be related to this story. It'll be something entirely different. So this is the last. So if you haven't read it, you can binge through it now. There is a lot of it to read, and if you have, you can be excited that this is the end. But there's a lot of other things coming later on from Charles. So this isn't the end of you; it is the end of this series. So that's good. And so I know that you have another reading for us from Invisible Sun. So another snippet from the middle of the book, you said.
Yeah. One question, is it okay if I go over the hour a bit?
Oh, sure. Why not?
Okay. Because this extract is a little bit longer than the last one. Not much,
okay.
But possibly enough to go over.
Okay. That's totally fine.
I've mentioned while we were talking about Kurt and his daughter and his granddaughter Rita, who ends up being recruited by Homeland Security to spy on other timelines. Rita turns out to be Miriam's adopted-out daughter, Miriam being the protagonist of the earlier Merchant Princes books, and there's a reason why she's involved. And this is an extract talking about what Rita is doing in the Commonwealth. So the setting, New London, which is the former imperial capital on Manhattan Island, timeline 3, August of 2020. Parenthetically, about the dates, this book was originally meant to be published in 2017, but everything just got in the way. So it was meant to be future SF, and now it's weirdly historical alt SF. Who knew? Anyway, back to Rita. Rita watched the glass-nosed trijet push back from the terminal building, engines belching smoke as they screeched into raucous life. Inspector Morgan stood beside her in a simulation of companionable silence. Rita didn't credit her with empathy. Alice Morgan lived for her job and was certainly not above manipulating Rita for her mission's ends. A chill of isolation prompted her to hug herself. Kurt was strapped inside of that silvery cigar shape with sharply raked wings, one of only a handful of passengers aboard the converted jet bomber taxiing towards the runway on the first leg of his journey to Berlin. Alone again. Kurt had come to some agreement with her birth mother. Mrs. Hjorth, Brilliana, one of Mrs. Burgesson's world-walking spooks, had whisked him away to the military airport immediately thereafter, and now she was walking back towards Rita and Inspector Morgan, shoulders sagging slightly, as if she had just discharged a burden of responsibility. Well, that's done, Brill remarked. Let's get you to the propaganda ministry for your play date. Rita trailed her towards the waiting car, rubbing at a patch of skin on her left arm. What just happened, she wondered. Her subdermal key generator itched, the programmable e-ink tattoo that allowed her to flash up the knot-like trigger engrams that enabled her to jaunt between timelines. Do you know what they want me to do yet? She asked. It's an acting gig. No biggie. We just have a script for you to read. Rita's eyes narrowed. I think you'd better explain. Inspector Morgan held the car door open for them. Inside, said Brill. I'll brief you on the way. The inspector and our driver are both security cleared. You do remember who I work for, right? Rita asked slowly. Brill climbed in beside her and closed the door. The car moved off. Yes, I am. This is awkward. She paused. Before you were recruited by DHS, you were an actor, yes? Most recently doing sales demonstrations of Haptotech motion capture gear. Well, we have a problem. We badly need someone who knows how to drive a motion capture rig for a couple of hours during the funeral ceremony, so that an absent guest can put in an appearance by proxy, as it were. Rita closed her eyes. Bend over, here it comes, she thought. Rita's position in the Commonwealth was ambiguous, if not downright dangerous. She'd arrived as a spy, a worldwalker dispatched by the Homeland Security Unit headed by Colonel Smith, to figure out just what kind of paratime civilization the US reconnaissance drones had discovered. Surprise, this timeline turned out to be a close sibling of her own, closer than the one stuck in the Stone Age anyway. It was populated by North Americans who spoke a dialect of English and built railroads, also jet fighters and nuclear weapons. They'd swept her up with frightening speed and efficiency, only to present her to her birth mother Miriam, a leader in the clan of worldwalkers. The clan's survivors were now living in exile in the Commonwealth, where they'd fled nearly 20 years ago. Miriam was now a very senior member of the Commonwealth government, and Colonel Smith had deliberately used Rita to open up a back channel to her for negotiations. But it was clear to Rita that her birth mother and her commanding officer were playing a deep game, and as a double agent trapped between two rival agencies, Rita was constantly looking over her shoulder, anticipating betrayal. What does my mother want me to do? Rita asked, and how is it going to compromise me further down the line? Brill chuckled. Direct as always. She tapped a finger on the armrest, betraying tension. I don't think this will compromise you with your employers in Homeland Security, but it's your call. What I can say is, we were making arrangements to receive a high-level defector from the French Empire. Then the operation went sideways, and we lost her in Berlin. Your grandfather has agreed to help retrieve her. But in the meantime, we need to... Who is it? Rita demanded. Brill took a deep breath. We want you to impersonate Princess Elizabeth Hanover, the heir in exile to the throne of the British Empire. It'll be for free, 4 days max, just until she gets here. We've got a studio with green screen and an imported motion capture rig, just like the ones you've worked with, for deep faking the TV broadcasts, both studio and live, so the French think she's arrived. Rita pinched the bridge of her nose. You want me to impersonate a princess? She paused. What happens if I say no? Well, Brill glanced away. I get to deliver my resignation letter. Quite possibly so does your mother. It'll be the biggest political scandal involving Mitty. Your Colonel Smith will find himself dealing with new and unfamiliar counterparts who may not choose to continue negotiations. For hardliners in the Commonwealth government, people who think the established methods for dealing with the French Empire will work just as well apply to the United States. Nuclear brinksmanship, in other words. I can't say for sure how bad it'll get, but Elizabeth was engaged to the French heir, not happily. That's why she wants to defect. And the worst case outcome is the King Emperor in St. Petersburg frames it as a kidnapping, blames the Commonwealth, and uses it as a pretext for war. Rita turned her head and glared at Brill. I don't deal well with threats, she stated. Brilliana leaned tiredly against the leather bench seat of the limousine. I'm not threatening you, she said. You're free to say no. But you're doing this to compromise me, aren't you? Rita jabbed a finger at her. Don't tell me you don't have dozens of actors on call who can. But we don't. Rita blinked. Bullshit. No, will you listen for a moment? This is not about us trying to put you in a compromising position. If we wanted to do that, Brill flicked imaginary lint from her lapel, we've got experts. But we don't need to. Frankly, as far as Homeland Security is concerned, you were compromised from the get-go simply because you're a worldwalker. So no, this isn't about you for once. You're new to the Commonwealth, so you had no reason to know this, but you're a dead ringer for Princess Elizabeth. You may have noticed some people giving you a double take. That would be why. She's of mixed descent like you, similar hair, similar skin tone. You're a few years older and a couple of centimeters shorter, but that's nothing that can't be fixed with cosmetics and platform shoes. You can impersonate her for the dignitaries at a state funeral who've never met her, given a suitable wardrobe and a voice coach, as well as doing the motion video capture. Do you know how many black TV actresses there are in New London? Whoever we picked would risk being recognized. You're a clean face, though, which makes you a perfect fit for Operation Zender. We've got people working on a set of scripts for you. It's the acting role of a lifetime. Rita, having run out of immediate objections, was speechless. Brill took her silence for agreement, or perhaps she simply decided to steamroller Rita into compliance. Either way, an hour later, Rita found herself facing off with a rumpled but intense-looking TV producer in a windowless office. Brilliana had left her with this guy after reassuring her that the propaganda ministry had approved him for most secret disinformation productions, official fake news. She pointed skeptically to the list of scripted scenes on the whiteboard off to one side. These are public appearances. How do you script for spontaneity? Oh, we have a set of scenarios and a set of set pieces, interviews and speeches. He raised a sheaf of papers. For the first day, it's cut and dried. Just you in a studio or with an interviewer. Costume and makeup as Elizabeth. The fancy bit is what comes next. The first man's state funeral scenes. Assume the subject herself isn't available by then. It was his turn for cheek twitching. I've seen the motion capture equipment from your timeline, and it's remarkable. I knew you were ahead of us, but seeing developments in my own field really puts it in perspective. Your point, Mr. Adams, Inspector Morgan prodded, showing just a flicker of impatience. Adams shook himself. Well, we need to broadcast footage of a princess in public, don't we? So we need to interpolate it into actual TV broadcasts in public settings, but not too public. Using these motion capture gadgets, we can set up a rendering pipeline. We point the cameras at the podium and track your kinematics, and the rendering pipeline replaces you with a generated image of the princess going through the same movements. So the dignitaries on the podium will be in on the secret, but the TV audiences sees who we want them to see, even though she's not there. Rita took a deep breath. But first you need to reinstall the Haptotech motion capture implants, don't you? Itching and sore patches had plagued her the year before, when she'd signed up for the job of demonstrating the new technology at trade shows. The trackers were invisible and accurate within millimeters, communicating wirelessly with transponders under the floor. Unfortunately, they required the injection of a bunch of rice grain-sized pellets under the skin. Yeah, Adam stood up. We have a doctor and a trained technician waiting to see you in the nursing station right after lunch. And then you need to kick me out as Elizabeth and let me study her voice for the studio impersonation. Rita trailed off. Somehow she'd become infected with enthusiasm for this illicit job, even though Colonel Smith would probably scold her for agreeing to anything without obtaining prior authorization. But it was an acting role. Indeed, it was her first professional performing role on camera, on TV, in front of a live audience, ever. It was a job she'd always wanted, even if she wasn't going to get her name in IMDb as a result, and it was going to help Miriam Burgesson out of a hole. Is this what being compromised feels like? Rita pondered. Because if so, maybe I should do it more often. And that's the end of that bit.
I love how they were selling her so hard on this. It was like they're really trying to sell her here. I was enjoying that a lot too. And Desiree was saying, and we were chatting about like they're really selling her hard here. Well, this is Invisible Sun. I will show the cover one more time. And this is the last book of the Merchant Princes series. So you can buy it at tubbyandcoos.com/special order. You can just go and order it from there. It's very easy. And also, a lot of you were already talking about the blog. So I assume that you know about it because you were talking about it in the chat. But if you want to follow Charlie online, you can follow the blog. I did put a link to it in the chat so that you can just click on it as well, since it's kind of a long little thing there. But this is the blog, and you do update it, correct? With you said you're about to put something on there, yeah.
It gets updated usually at least once a month, usually more often than that. And the real point of it is the discussions, because the comment threads. A comment thread isn't really over long until it goes past 1,000 comments.
I love that you get so many comments on there. That's awesome. So join the community on the blog there. And you can also follow on Twitter. It's just at @CStross on Twitter. And follow everything that is going on, all of the upcoming books. And thank you so much for doing this today. I know that it's a little late your time, so I appreciate you being here. And I'm sure everyone watching appreciates this as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. And yes, thank you to everyone who is watching now or later. And we will see y'all for our next event. We actually have another event at 9 p.m. my time tonight. So we're doing a late night event here as well with Neon Yang, who is in Singapore. So it's actually going to be morning their time and night my time. So we're doing that a little bit later. So pop back for that, because that should be fun as well. And thank you so much, Charlie.
Thanks.
This has been amazing. I really appreciate you being here.
It's been great.
Y'all have a good evening, and everyone else watching have a great day. Thanks.